just to have a, I would love for us all to have a conversation with as many questions as you can think of throughout the whole morning. So for my first question to you, well, I am Linda Pechin-Long. I'm in Kansas, Winfield, Kansas right now, and I am a certified educator with Holistic Management International. I know you shared my bio in the email, so we're not really going to talk a whole lot about me. But I would like to know from the group, does anyone know what holistic management is? Have you heard of holistic management?
Hi, Linda. My name's Kate Sabino. I'm the education coordinator for DGA here in Maine, and I'm here with Annabelle, who's an apprentice, and then Elizabeth Tarantino, who's the assistant herd manager at Wolf's Neck, will be joining us soon. But I just wanted to say I'm really excited for this because I took a course on holistic management through HMI. I guess it was 4 years ago. It was 2019, and it was like a 6-month course. It was their new agrarian program, but I did it virtually. And it was like a really great overview of kind of like what holistic management is. But I was kind of doing it in a vacuum, like because I was remote, I didn't really have peers to sort of like talk through things with. And it was my mentor farm at the time that had introduced me to it, which I'm so grateful for. But, you know, they were like in their early 60s and I was in my early 20s. And I was like, this is a really cool framework, but, you know, I feel like I'm 22 years old, or I was 22 at the time. And I was just like, I feel like it's really hard to articulate what I want because I'm still learning that. And I, you know, still 4 years later, 5 years later, almost, I'm learning a lot about myself. So I guess I do have sort of a sense of what holistic management is, but I'm just really excited to be learning about it again in this context with sort of more of a community aspect. I've really been craving sort of a way to move through the process with a group of peers that is in a more like similar season of life, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Katie. Does anyone else know what holistic management is or is familiar with holistic management?
Hey y'all, my name's Ashley. I'm from upstate New York, and I took HMI 10 years ago, right before we started this business, and didn't really use the resources then. My understanding is the triple bottom line. There's a like framework for decision making. It all sounds like good and fine, but and awesome. But in the day-to-day, that's not, it hasn't been practical for me. And not that we've tried too hard, like I kind of like set it down after that. And I have a lot of other mentors, and like Rose Wilson is a consultant that we've been using for business planning. Also, we're working with Cooperative Development Institute, CDI, for possibly transforming our small business into a cooperative. So I think I'd love to weave in some elements of HMI eventually. And I think they'll fit really well with all the work that I'm doing right now. So I'm here to get a refresher, and yeah, so thanks.
Thank you, Ashley. Angie, are you familiar at all with holistic management?
Yes, I've heard lots about it and dealt with people who've taken courses on it. So I'm familiar, but I don't have a in-depth background on it. So excited to learn more.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, so this is so good, and Kate, it is so funny. Your comments really struck me about your age when you were introduced to holistic management, because first of all, holistic management is a decision-making framework. We focus really this framework for managing your resources, your land, your people, and livestock in a way that meets the triple bottom line: people, planet, profit. Every decision is made with not only, of course, we all have to make a profit. Money makes the world go around. There's no doubt about that. But the decisions that we make also has to be good for our community, our families, all the people that are involved in making the decisions. And it also has to be good for our land. We have to make decisions that promotes good ecosystem processes. But what really struck me about what Katie said, I was at the Regenerate conference last week in Santa Fe, and one of the HMI program directors was saying, kind of something to the effect of what Katie said, that when you're young, you really don't know what you want. And holistic management is really rooted in the crew of holistic management is creating that goal. And we make decisions based on our values. So that's where it really starts, in creating that holistic goal and finding your why. So it's really, how do you make decisions in your day-to-day right now?
Like, how do I personally?
Personally or for your business? What are you making your decisions towards?
So I would say at this point, I've sort of refocused on, I do have a holistic goal. It's printed and pinned to my wall opposite my bed in my bedroom. And I've kind of like rewritten it or reshaped it a little bit each year. And I feel like I'm at a point now where I am kind of more, I feel like I'm making decisions against that goal better. But there was a point in time, like 4 years ago, I was apprenticing on a dairy. I had worked on dairies for 5 years prior to that. So I was like very certain that this is what I wanted to do. I felt that like dairy grazing was very much, the career that I wanted and kind of a calling of mine. But I also felt like, oh my God, this industry is so complicated and I feel like I want to contribute to it in a way that's meaningful, but I don't understand it and I don't really have probably all the skills that I would need to. And so I made the really difficult decision to actually stop or pause my apprenticeship. And I went and I worked for corporate food companies for 3 years. And like it was so valuable as a learning experience. Like it just opened up this whole world that I had never seen before, but I was so miserable the entire time I was doing it. And my biggest tension was like, this doesn't, as my holistic goal is written, it feels really misaligned, but it also in another way, like if I gut check it, I feel like I have to do this. I have to step outside of what feels comfortable for me and what I ultimately want to be doing. I've got to get that survey level perspective if I want to, just support myself or make a living or be a good business person, grazing dairy cattle, and B, like understand sort of how the board or the game board is laid out and who the players are and what the rules are. And so I felt really torn and I was like, I don't know how to reconcile how I feel about this or what I'm thinking about this with this system. And maybe it was simply that my goal wasn't written in a way that reflected like all of the ways that I wanted to connect to this industry. But yeah, I was having like those same mentors who introduced me to this framework were like, well, don't you have a goal? Like, why don't you just make decisions against your goal? I'm like, well, I feel like it's not that simple. My goal keeps changing because I have to learn these things about myself. I have to like collide with the world blindly for a few years and then maybe I'll figure out what that goal really is. But anyway, did that answer your question at all or was that just a ramble?
A little bit of both. No, it is really good because I feel like what's really important is that when you create that goal that we're making the decisions towards, and the goal is really the crew of the holistic management, is that we start with creating that goal, but that goal is flexible. That goal evolves as we evolve. We are not sitting down chiseling the Mayan calendar into stone somewhere and saying that this is what we are going to make decisions towards. But we really clarify what is our why, what is it that I value, what is it that I want, and from that we start making, testing the decisions to make sure that when we do make decisions long term and short term, that it's moving us towards what is really important to us. And what it also does, and back up a little bit, it is really in a business or in a organization, or whether that is a nonprofit, whether it's a government, it is really important to create your individual holistic goal. Figure out what's really important to you. What is your why? What is it that gets you out of bed in the morning, that truly excites you? And what do you need to do for you to make that happen? But then as a group or organization, you create a common goal, and the more buy-in. For example, how many farmers and ranchers do you know that they work long hours, hard hours, grueling hours, of the most hardworking people around, right? We can all agree on that, I'm sure. What I often see is that there's very little communication between the stakeholders. They're not aligned. Everyone is just working really, really hard, and they're not aligned. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people, especially farmers and ranchers, to get together and say, okay, what do we want and how do we do it? And by really focusing on those core values, you also are able to say no to things that aren't of importance and value to you, to really be clear on what's important. So when you make decisions, you really narrow it down and say, is this really important to me? Is this where I want to go? So, for example, personal example of how not everyone is on the same page is my own farm right now. My son just moved back on the farm. He's 32 years old. He's been away since, he was early 20s. And now he came home and he wants to be part of the farm. He wants to build a house on the farm, which I'm like, that's great. We have only been on this new farm for about a year. We moved from a large acreage to this farm. So my husband and I are creating priorities. There's tons of work to do on this farm, trust me. And we are creating a list of priorities. And my son wants to be very helpful and randomly starts projects and spending money in random directions. And we're like, we need to get together because what's important to him is important to us, but not as important as it is to him. So it seems like no one knows what the other person is doing. I think building a new fence around the horse paddock is a priority. My husband thinks that, getting the new water line in or clearing trees is a priority. My son thinks that concrete in the Quonset back part is priority. And we're all moving in different directions because we haven't taken the time, or I'm not going to say that. My son has not yet created that goal. So we haven't been able to sit down as a family and say, okay, what is our common goal? And how can we move forward together? We're kind of moving forward, but it's not this round wheel. It's this square wheel that's just kind of bumping along. And we can do things much more efficient if we just sit down and create this common goal and common list of priorities. Does that make sense to everyone? How, if you just get on the same page and move towards that goal. So when my son's making a decision, it's towards his goal. When my husband's making a decision, it's towards his goal. And I'm over here going, what about the horse fence? I've been wanting it for 4 months. So, we're still getting along, but it's, it's not as smooth and effective as we could be if we all just got together and go, okay, this is where we're going as a team. And another example of how a holistic goal and testing decision really work is there is a certified educator named Joel Benson from Colorado. He was actually mayor of Buena Vista, Colorado. And when he was, before he became mayor, he used to go to the town meetings, and the town was losing money and no one was getting along. There's tons of money being spent in every direction. Nobody could really come up with clear answers. So he actually ended up running for mayor. And when he became mayor, he realized that a lot of the money that was being spent was going to contractors because they had done the job for a long time. So we just keep going there instead of getting bids from other contractors, and and there was just a lot of friction between council members. There was a lot of friction overall in the town, and he implemented the framework, the holistic management framework. The decision making started by creating a holistic goal with, and for the whole town of or town council, and then they started testing the decisions towards that common goal and their statement of purpose, and really made some huge improvements and changes on a government level with this framework. So it's not just for farmers and ranchers. Any questions about that or comments on that? I see you nodding in time, so we can't hear, and I don't know if you're trying to make a comment or if it's a side conversation.
No, I'm sorry, we've got a few people in here and, we're just sort of connecting what you're saying to.
I made
Yeah.
a comment that that's in the Bible.
Which is fine.
No, just that, like, I don't know, the passage about being unequally yoked, if you're yoking yourselves as a team, like, I just think it's a good, like, mental image. Like, it's something that's, I was brought up with, like, being more of a relational thing. I mean, this is still relational, like, but anyway, yeah, just the same thing, same, like, common goal. Like, you have to just sort of put all your muscle together to, like, move things forward.
Yeah, that's a really great comment, and that's really where where we start is by getting for being very clear on the whole that you manage. What is it that's in your circle of influence? You start by clarifying your circle of influence, and then creating a common goal with the people that are in your circle of influence. So for example, for our farm, it's the decision making and the stakeholders is my son, my husband, and myself. And that's really, we need to be on the same page. We need to have the same goal. We need to test the decisions together towards that common goal. And we also need to do financial planning together to make sure that we prioritize our expenses in the same directions. Meaning, for example, like what is holding up progress for us right now? Is it the fence around the horses? Is it the concrete in the Quonset? Is it tree removal, whatever that may be? But we really also want to look to the community and make sure that we are providing for our community as well. So when you I know a couple of you that took holistic management training. What are some questions that you have about holistic management? What is holding you back from really practicing it at this time?
I think that it's funny that you mentioned, or I guess not that funny, makes a lot of sense, but one thing that you mentioned that the herd manager here, Ben, also talks about a lot is finding your why. And I think one thing that I have, maybe one reason why it's kind of taken me a minute to get to this point where I feel like I can use this framework, or this framework can evolve with me, is that like I wasn't really identifying the why. I was like so focused on the what. And I feel like that is starting to open up a different perspective on this framework. But I don't know, in some ways it's kind of scary. Like I think sometimes when we confront, or I feel like when I confront the why, it's like you actually have to abandon a little bit of yourself. Like you have to realize that your identity is not necessarily what you do, which is what I feel very conditioned to think. Like I am, I am a dairy grazer, and to be that, I have to do that every day, or like I have to own this or have this position or whatever, all of these things that actually are not really within my control. And then I think that I kind of have to overcome that fear of like, yep, you gotta let that go a little bit and actually figure out why you're doing this. And I guess that has opened up a new like avenue for me. And it's not that I feel like there's a roadblock. It just takes a little bit of courage to lean into that and be like, okay, yep, gotta ask that question and gotta answer it. And it probably takes some time and rumination.
That is so interesting. And so when you're peeling away those layers of finding your why, I recall working with a person, and I was like, what is it that really, makes you happy? What gets you out of bed in the morning? What is your why? And the answer was, I love cows. Okay, so do I. So, but I was like, why do you love cows? What is the answer to why do you love cows? Well, he's like, well, I just love being out there with them. I love working with them. And I said, well, why do you love working with them? Well, I like being outside in nature. I like the freedom that it gives me to work with the animals. I like working for myself. And I was like, so we kept asking the question, why? So, Kate, why are you a dairy grazer? If you keep asking yourself why, and sometimes what we get to is that, okay, the root cause of what you're doing is like you like to be working at the dairy, you like grazing the cattle, but if that wasn't an opportunity, is it something about that you really, really love, that you could be fulfilled if that went away? Does that make sense? If you're really looking at your why. So for me, I love cattle, I love sheep, I love grazing those animals. But if I no longer had those animals, what is it about that can still fulfill my why? So I think, but it is interesting because we had a conversation at the Regenerate conference with some of the younger people, and they said exactly the same thing you're doing, Katie. It's like, well, I'm young. I said this earlier. I don't know what I want. I don't know what I'm doing. I just want to figure things out. But even in that, I still think that you're in your holistic goal. For example, in my holistic goal, what I want is I want time with family and friends. I want meaningful work. I want financial security, and I want to be healthy, right? So, and I see in most holistic goals, that's pretty much I don't think I've seen a holistic goal yet where some form of that is not in there, right? So, and so that's our why. That's really what's important to us, right? If you look at that. And then the what, how do I do that? And the thing about your, when you go to, okay, what do I need to do to have meaningful work? That could be the dairy grazing, or that could be, working with my sheep every day, or it could be educate others on holistic management. But you don't necessarily have to say, if your goal is to have meaningful work. The forms of production doesn't have to be detailed. You can have the forms of production could be have a job that makes me happy, and that can change, right? And I always say, when it comes to good health, for me, that means I need regular sleep. If I don't get enough sleep, I'm not gonna be healthy. It means going for walks with my dog. It means doing stretches and yoga. For my husband, that means going running miles and miles and miles, right? So the forms of production can be different for everyone. So you don't feel tied down maybe in that forms of production. You will just write down, make healthy choices. Okay. Financial security I think for my husband and for us to have financial security, something that's really, really important is to do our financial planning each year. To be very clear on, our income and where we need to spend money and how much we need to spend. So is that a little bit helpful in the sense of creating the holistic goal so it's not so restrictive in a way?
Yeah, it's funny, as I've gotten older, like I find that my holistic goal says more, I feel like it's evolved to like protect my most basic needs, which feel constantly in peril in this kind of work. But yeah, I think one thing that I also struggle with is that sometimes there is not conflict, but like financial security is a big part of my holistic goal. And my, I guess this comes down to the decision-making framework, but like one thing I really struggle with is like, yeah, I am not going to have the kind of financial security that I would really like for probably a very long time. And there is always that option. I could go back and have healthcare, have, retirement savings, all taken care of, have absolutely no issue whatsoever affording housing. Like that is an option. And every day I say no to it. And I don't want to say yes to it because it was so painful and unhealthy to do that. But I feel like I'm caught between these two extremes. And they're both kind of articulated in my goal. Like I do talk about having meaningful work, and I do talk about these very basic things in ways that are kind of more fundamental. Like it's not very specific. It doesn't say how I have to do those things. But in making the decisions, at least at this stage in my life, it feels very challenging to make decisions where I feel like I'm really honoring all those parts of that goal. I feel like the compromises I have to make are pretty significant. And I understand that's kind of just part of how it goes. That's to a certain degree a part of everybody's, career progression, at least in this industry. But yes, that is really helpful. And one thing that I've continued to find helpful, is articulating things kind of more simply and flexibly. Yeah.
And I think it's also important to remember that the what, the forms of production, the hows you test towards your holistic goal. And I completely understand when you said you come back from a corporate career, my husband has been raising cattle. That's all he's ever done, right? I had a corporate job as well. And about in 2012, I quit my corporate job. I gave up the insurance. I gave up the paid vacations. I get up the sick time because my health was so bad. And our quality of life was terrible. So we really did have to make a compromise, and all of a sudden going from having a salary to making my own income. I completely understand that. But honestly, that's where that financial planning is crucial. And that is where that decision testing is crucial, because you are testing, you clear on your values. And yes, money does make the world go around, but it really helps you separating that want and the need by testing towards your holistic goal and prioritizing your spendings. It is the holistic management financial planning course. It's really helps you prioritize your spendings and planning for profit before expenses. And sometimes planning for profit is, that profit that you are able to plan for, especially when you are younger. And before you become, I honestly, I always say, I wish that, when you were 25 or 30, and really had the energy, that you could have the money to afford to do all the things that you want to do, because when you're finally financially secure, you're too dang tired to do it, right? I feel that sometimes, but the planning for profit before expenses and testing those financial expenditures towards your holistic goal, it's really huge. And that is actually another thing that we're going through with my son right now, because I'm like you, he has to take the foundations course, and he's not taking it with me. And because I think anyone who's worked with family, I think we can get along great. And he's actually he is recommending me to others as an instructor, as a facilitator. But we have agreed that I am not going to be the one working with him on creating the holistic goal and the decision testing. So we'll continue to love each other. How's that? But he needs to create that goal and understand the framework. And then also another thing that he has to do is to take the financial planning course, and understand how it works together, because prioritizing those expenses, planning for income, and after he does that, that's when we're going to sit down as a family and say, okay, where are you building the house on the farm? And we only have 80 acres. It's not a huge farm, but he does want to build a house on the farm. But he has to show us that he understands that you can indeed be profitable, but it is a planning process. And it's challenging, I get it, but again, when you start testing those decisions, and it becomes running, it doesn't mean that you're not making decisions the old-fashioned way, right? You still ask your neighbors, your friends, your parents, whatever. But when you hit that pause button and run those tests, those questions through the decision testing process, and really separate that want from the need, or need from the want. And that really at first is very awkward, very awkward. But when you get used to it, you will find yourself in a grocery store, like looking at a bottle of salad dressing going, do I want this or do I need this? I mean, and that's an extreme example, but it really just becomes second nature to you, and you go, no, because I do need this, or no, I really just want it. And if you really just want it, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but at least you're thinking about it, right? So just really doing that planning for profit. And another huge thing about the holistic management framework is planning. I mean, everything is planning, but then monitoring that plan. So whether it's your grazing plan, your financial plan, or your land plan, it all ties together, and you have long-term and short-term goals within that. But you're also setting up a monitoring criteria. So if you are doing something and you start going off track, you can really catch yourself before it's costing you a lot of time or a lot of money. And you can either, make adjustments, or you are, catching it in time. And if, for example, during COVID, there were several things that we had to do that just simply cost us to replan everything, because everything was just so off track that we had to sit down and replan. And our financial plan was one of those things that we had to completely replan. So monitoring is a huge part of it. And I think when you implement that planning, being clear on your holistic goal and your values, just always keeping your values, your quality of life really matters. And you're starting to really focus on creating, making decisions towards your quality of life and monitoring, I think you'll find that it does, it's a game changer. It honestly was for me. And I have not one day since I quit my corporate job and started making a third of what I used to make, I have not regretted it a single day. Can I buy the cars that I used to buy? No, I cannot. Can I splurge the way I used to? No, I cannot. Am I happier and healthier than I've ever been? Absolutely. So, and like I said, it doesn't mean that it's not difficult, but it gives you clarity. And when you're going through difficult situations, when I said that we moved to the farm about a year ago, we had actually leased 2,000 acres for 15 years. We'd been told that we would never lose that lease. And we didn't. But the new manager changed the contract and the cost of the lease. So when we did a quick gross profit analysis, we realized that there was no way we could make money and keep that lease. And we had 250 cows, and we had sheep, and we lived in a house 6 miles from this ranch where we leased this acreage. And all of a sudden, we have 6 months to figure something else out. And I can't tell you what a lifesaver this framework was, because I knew, I knew what my holistic goal was. I knew what my quality of life statement was. And every decision we made, we tested towards our holistic goal. So in 6 months, I went from owning 250 cows to 100 cows, an 80-acre farm. And, the cows are not on the farm because there's not enough room. So we're having to decide, what are we going to do on the farm? We're doing sheep there, cows on another lease. But there was a time where we really thought we were going to have to sell all our cows. But every decision that we made throughout that 6-month period, that was an absolute whirlwind. Some of them were heart-wrenching, absolutely gut-wrenching decisions. But by using the decision testing questions and being clear on our goals, long-term and short-term, when the decision was made, I didn't second guess any decision. I cursed a decision. I cried over decisions. I was angry, and all the things, but I did not second guess any decision that we made. So I think, it's, for me, it's an absolute starting to practice, because when I was in a corporate, my husband has been a holistic practitioner for many, many years. And we had a goal, but I didn't really test the decisions like he did, because I was in the hospitality business. I worked a lot of hours. I didn't use the framework the way I do now. But when I started doing it, I was like, I don't worry about things that are beyond my control anymore. I don't worry about, I'm clear on what I can manage, what I can control, and that's the bubble I stay in. And that's what I make decisions towards, and that's what I work towards. Any comments or questions on that?
I appreciate you sharing how that framework was helpful at a really difficult time. And I think maybe another thing that is not always featured very heavily in like more formal courses is like, when you're using the framework, it doesn't mean the decisions you make aren't really hard. It doesn't mean that I think that it's never presented this way explicitly, but there's kind of this feeling of like, don't worry, there are these 7 questions you can ask yourself, and so long as you do, everything will be fine, and you'll just be like right on your way. And it's like, I think one thing that I was having a hard time reconciling was like, on one hand, this feels like the right decision, and it is in some ways moving me towards my goal, but it is just so hard. And I was angry and crying and cursing that decision too. And in hindsight, like I'm grateful I made some of the decisions I did, but I think I was not really understanding or believing that I was using the framework correctly, because it wasn't easy to move through those decisions. And so I think that perspective of like, you can use the framework and it can serve you really well. That doesn't mean it's not really challenging to go through that process. I think that's really meaningful. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. And I agree with you. I think that we often, like you said, we say, you use the questions, you plan. Yeah, it doesn't mean you're not going to have hardship. It doesn't mean that, everything's a bed of roses. It just means that you're more equipped to deal with those challenges and not second guessing those decisions. And another thing about testing those decisions, part of that decision testing is the gut check. We have tested decisions that have passed, and I had said, nope, no way, we're not doing it. I don't feel good about it. And when that happens, that's when it's really important to set up monitoring criteria for that decision. And also, if you're using that goal and the decision testing and something fails, but you want to do it anyway, you can. Obviously, you can. But again, you have used those hit that pause button and tested it and checked it. So again, that just really means that now you have to be really, really observant and set up some monitoring criteria for that decision. So yeah, I also feel often like when we're teaching this framework, we're working on helping people create their goal, identify their values, and using the framework. That everything's going to be fine. But you're right, we don't often say, you know what, life is still hard, it's still challenging. And so that's really a good point. And another thing is, we're never looking for perfection, right? We're looking for progress. And this is really a framework and a method that can help you make steady progress. You're still working with nature, you're still working with animals, you're still working with, for example, the financial planning as a direct to consumer. I market grass-fed beef and grass-fed lamb. And 90% of what we used to market was at the farmers market. When COVID hit, the farmers market shut down. So all of a sudden, I was like, and the market season had just started because we didn't have markets in the winter. They started in March. March, everything shut down. We'd had 2 weeks of markets, and our income stream in the winter being very low. We are really, really looking forward to that spring of money starting to come back in, because we spent some of that money, and it was a pretty scary thing to have happen. But I also say that having that financial plan and being able to just look at that financial plan and see, okay, this is the incomes that I'm expecting. This is the money that I'm expecting to go out. This is my high priority expenses. This is my maintenance expenses, like groceries and, things that I can tweak a little bit. These are the taxes. Having that big picture and the ability to see, like, okay, I have this much money. I'll be okay for this amount of time before I really have to start freaking out, was very, very helpful. With that said, as many of you probably know, the grocery stores ran out of supplies, and all of a sudden, I couldn't keep up with demand. But with that initial thing happen, I didn't know that was going to happen 2 weeks later, right? And yeah, as it turned out, COVID ended up being, for our business, the best thing that ever happened to our income stream. But again, just having that plan and monitoring that plan was huge when that happened.
Sorry, I'm jumping in again. I just wanted to make a comment that I'm glad that we brought up, like, I feel like having those, I don't think you explicitly said it, but sort of like thresholds of like, this is how much we can take, like, and having the thresholds be points of like, this is when we will reevaluate, like, this is when we'll have to make another decision, and just sort of like, I think, something that would lend to being good, like being good at flexing your decision making is like knowing when that is appropriate. It doesn't necessarily have to be like at every crossroads, but I just wanted to point out, like, I try to be really mindful of like, like what is our threshold here? Like, what's our high low? Like, what's our conservative threshold? Like, what's beyond what we think we could take? Like, I don't know, just or even, I don't know. I think you have to have a really solid understanding of, your what is in your toolbox, so before you're able to make those thresholds. So anyway, I just wanted to jump in.
No, perfect. I love that. And I mean, yeah, that's a great comment. And you're talking about the tools, and we also do teach about the tool. You have several different tools for managing the ecosystem, and we often just use technology as is our most used tools, right? Does anybody know what other tools we could have to use the ecosystem? Some of you have taken the holistic management. We really do challenge people to use grazing animals, animal impact. Fire is a tool. I don't know in your area how used fire is as a tool to improve the ecosystem. It is an overused tool in our environment for sure. I'm in the Flint Hills of Kansas. Rest is a wonderful tool can be a wonderful tool to manage the ecosystem processes. It can also be very damaging depending on where you are on the brittleness scale, meaning how humid is your environment. So there's a lot to take into consideration. And but I think really the most important thing we do is we are really, really wanting people to live their best quality of life while taking care of the ecosystem, taking care of the land that sustains us and are profitable. And it's not perfect, because nothing is. It's not a silver bullet, because a silver bullet does not exist, if we're going to be honest. And but it really is a framework that can help you make the best decisions that you can towards your quality of life, at any given time. Any other questions, comments?
We're coming close to the hour here. I'm just going to put up a really quick, or am I? A really quick poll. It's just a quick 2-question monthly webinar. So if you see that come up on your screen, I think it's a total of 2 questions. And then as we're filling that out, Linda, do you have any like contact info you could offer, or if people want to learn more about holistic planning, especially involving managed grazing, is there anything you want to say about people getting in touch with you or anybody who watches this after we record it?
I will put my contact information, my email, and my website in the chat.
Perfect. Great. Right, and then if there's any final thoughts from anyone.
So maybe this is a question for both Jess and Linda. So one class that I actually didn't take as an apprentice is the holistic management course, because I had taken that HMI course. And I'm really excited for the spring to sort of see what that looks like. But one thing I wondered about, and again, maybe this just exists already and it's not really on my radar because I wasn't part of that, but I don't know, I almost think about like, what if apprentices either in the same year or like in the same geography who moved through the holistic management course had like either a group that met monthly, or maybe that's too often, maybe like quarterly, or like, I don't know. This isn't really a comment, it's just something I try to brainstorm or envision. Like, is there already sort of a way that apprentices or journey folk keep in touch on this topic? Just because I think support and like hearing other people even just articulate their goal, like sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't even think of that. Like I'm gonna put that in my goal. Or just feeling like you're not alone in trying to navigate this process. I don't know, that's just something I think of. Does that exist, or like has that ever kind of been piloted?
Yeah, I think that would be so wonderful. The original, forever ago now, holistic management class was an in-person thing, and it didn't end up being just feasible for like pick a reason. It was far away. It was not, the staffing wasn't awesome. But at the end of that, I was like, I like shook a yellow notepad at everybody, and I was like, please give me your emails and phone numbers. Like, I want to hear. It was so valuable. It was so valuable to share those ideas. And with the follow-up part and the testing ideas and putting things through a framework, I think you're absolutely right. And I'm sure there's space for that to be worked into, even if it doesn't end up being facilitated by Linda, if Linda provides the framework and then the follow-up is done like with me or an EC in the area. I think there's so much value in continuing to share that information, and that's definitely a great goal to have. I love that idea so much.
Yeah, I would just follow up, Katie. I love that idea, and I see the need. Every group that I facilitate, I see the need for that follow up and that connection to continue. Because if you just you finish, it's an overwhelming course framework, and all of a sudden you have no one to brainstorm ideas with. So it's hugely important for those groups to continue. And I actually facilitate, they're called Region Ag Mentoring Groups. I've facilitated one in Colorado. I'm currently facilitating one in Mississippi and one in Arkansas. And part of what I've started doing is I create just like text message, group chats with the whole group, with every group I facilitate. So if there's nothing happening for a while, I'll just shoot out a text to the group and say, hey, how's it going? And we usually get a conversation started. With the international groups, they use WhatsApp a lot. But, one group that I facilitated, they created a Facebook group where they're sharing pictures and conversations. But I really see the value of doing exactly that. And I think if we don't create that, we're just not effective as educators, because when you become isolated and don't have that support and the ability to ask questions or brainstorm ideas, you're just not going to use it.
Yeah, well, and then when you start talking to people who haven't taken this course in terms of like, the 4 ecosystem processes, or like they just think you're crazy. Like you kind of come away with this language that, it's a
Yeah.
little insular, and you're like, okay, okay. So yeah, I don't know. I think about that a lot, not just as the EC, I'm wearing my EC hat, but kind of selfishly, I'm a recent program graduate, and I don't know. I think the next big question for me and for everybody else who's graduating is like, great, you've completed this program, and now the question becomes, how do you, if you want to, continue in this industry and make all the parts of your life, work around it, or really it's the opposite. How do you fit this career into your life and all the other things that are important to you? So yeah, I don't know. Just a thought I had, but maybe
No, I think it's great. And you brought up a hugely important part of implementing what you're learning, because you do need continued support. It doesn't, just because you've graduated doesn't mean that you all of a sudden have all the answers, right? It needs, you've hit the next step, you got to the next level, the next step, but you're still going to continue to need support moving beyond that. I don't think we ever get to the point where we don't need the support or we don't need that community. So I think that's hugely important. It's a big part of it.
Yeah. Think holistically about holistic management.
Exactly.
Yes.
Community. Yes.
Yep. Yeah. Learning, for me, holistic management, implementing ideas needs to happen in community.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make me unique. I think that's true of all human beings.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Well, thank you again, Linda, for being here with us today and for getting your contact info up. And thank you to everyone who was able to attend. And then, Linda, you will be you will remain as the instructor for the spring holistic management class, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, awesome. So